You are not struggling to finish your novel because you're not smart enough. And it's not because you are not creative enough. And it's definitely not because you are not dedicated. You're struggling to finish your novel because you are following the advice that most experts in the fiction writing space tell you to follow. And trying to write that way is completely broken and will always keep you stuck. By the end of this video, you are going to understand why the way you've been writing so far is not conducive to finishing your novel. In fact, it's just the opposite. It's the fastest way to hit a dead end in your writing. Plus, I'm going to give you the 3 shifts that completely changed my fiction writing process and allowed me to go from struggling to finish my first draft to knowing how to take any and every story idea that comes to me and flesh it out into a complete, highly emotional novel in only a few months. So go ahead and give me a yes in the comments if you are either struggling to finish your first novel, or maybe you have finished one but don't feel confident that it's going to resonate with readers. So I know that you try and you try, but every time you sit down to write, it's like you're hitting walls. You've tried writing prompts and templates and craft books, and they all give pretty good writing advice, but at the end of the day, you're still struggling to finish your novel. You're still struggling to implement what the craft books are saying. Like, how do you actually do that? What does it actually look like on the page? Maybe your scenes, when you do write them, feel flat, or you have a great premise, but you're not sure where you're going with your story, where it's going to end, what it's going to look like. You may write and rewrite the same passages that you feel really passionate about, but you have a hard time moving on to other ones. You feel like you're a slow writer. Maybe you're just not up to this. Maybe it's not meant to be. So you end up stalling out on your manuscripts and putting them aside, and then maybe you come back to them weeks or months or years later, and the cycle begins again. And I want you to hear this because you are not alone in experiencing this. Most, if not all, fiction writers across the board experience this at some point in their fiction writing journey. And the worst part is, we tend to think it's a lack of discipline. If we just sit down and put our minds to it, refuse to leave the chair until we force the story out, eventually something has to click, right? And we'll be that genius author that we dream of being. But writing doesn't feel hard for the reasons that you think it does. The first reason that writing feels so hard is that you don't completely understand the real reason that readers read fiction. Readers don't read for action, for romance, or for plot twists. Not really. And I'm going to talk about this more in a later video, so make sure and stay tuned for that. But you have to understand that readers read fiction in order to feel big emotions in a safe space. Now, our world does not hold space for big emotions, does it? But human beings want to feel and process big emotions. And fiction has the unique ability to help them do that, but without experiencing the real-life danger of the situation. Once you understand that, writing is going to become a little bit easier. The second reason that it feels hard to finish your book is because you don't know what you don't know. You don't understand the real nature of story, the real thing that it's based on. And what it's based on is actually human transformation. Okay, we'll get into this in more detail later, but understanding that your writing, your character arc should be based on human transformation as a psychological process will completely revolutionize the way that you approach your storytelling, okay? And not understanding that is what's really tripping you up right now. And then there's the question of subconscious creativity. So let me explain this really quickly. Your creativity, your emotion, and your imagination, all 3 which are very necessary to write fiction, and all 3 which are a non-physical process, live in your subconscious mind. Now, the conscious mind is what we use for doing everyday things, being in the moment, to-do lists, that sort of thing. And there's a lot of logic that goes into the conscious mind, excuse me. The subconscious mind is for your creativity, right? It's not as logical. It's for your emotion. It's for your imagination. And when you're trying to force your story out using templates or, sitting down and being like, I'm going to figure this out no matter what, you are using your logical mind to try and force your story out. And that is never going to work, ever. You have to learn to surrender to the subconscious mind and let the ideas flow. And once you can do that, I promise you, you will never experience writer's block again, ever. Will you automatically know exactly what comes next? No, there's a little bit of work that goes into it, right? Writing is always going to be a little bit of work, but it will be very easy to work through and you'll never get stuck and blocked. And I want you to understand that this is why finishing your draft feels hard, because for a long time, I thought it was me. But when I talk to other writers, they're experiencing the exact same problems. So I want you to know that you're not alone in this. This is just part of the creative process. Our world has more distractions than ever before. And let's be real, there is more competition in the fiction space than there has ever been. And then there's AI, yes, we have to mention it, which also has changed the game a bit. But this is why it's more important than ever for you to write your soul story. What is a soul story? Great question. Glad you asked. A soul story is one that is written from your unique subconscious creativity. It's coming from the deepest part of your identity, of your soul, of your experiences, of the lenses through which you see the world. And what that means is that you are very passionate about it, and it is by nature going to be highly emotional, okay? So we are not just trying to assign events to a template in the hopes that we'll have a great story. And we are not trying to force a story out or to use somebody else's story or to use logic to say, what works and what comes next. This is you really trusting your subconscious creativity to write a fantastic and emotional story. That is a soul story. And it's more important than ever that you do this because readers have told us with no reservation that they do not want AI written stories. And here's the thing, most authors are afraid of AI cannibalizing our sales and taking our readers, right? But that is not something that you have to worry about. In fact, you really should be looking at this from the opposite perspective. AI is a massive opportunity for fiction writers. Why? Because AI doesn't have a soul. Your passion for your story will bleed through your words on the page and infect your readers with that same emotion, with that same passion. And AI written stories cannot do that. Sure, they can logically put together a pretty good hero's journey story, but there's no passion behind it. There's no emotion behind it because it's not a real person writing it. And having great passion and joy in your story is exactly how you're going to give the reader an emotional experience, which is what they're craving. AI cannot do that. Readers right now are begging for emotional stories written by real human beings. And if you're still using the same old way to write that I've been talking about that doesn't work very well, that's okay. I understand it's what we openly teach in our industry. And I'm not even throwing shade at those who teach it. They teach it because it's the only way they know how to teach story. They just haven't figured it out yet. Like I said before, creativity is intangible. So it's difficult for most people to talk about it in a tactical or strategic kind of way. But that doesn't mean it's impossible. All right, so this is the advice that you need to stop following, and I'm going to tell you why. One of them is write a book and then just write another book. Now, the reason people say this is because the idea is that the more you write, the more experience you'll have, and it is difficult sometimes, like I said, to nail down exactly what is wrong, but if you keep writing, you will hopefully intuitively just get better as you go. Now, I'm not going to say that that's untrue. You will get better the more you write. That's absolutely true. But here's the thing. Most people I know, which is most writers that I know, when they use this approach to improve their writing, it takes them about 10 years to hit success. And no, I'm not talking about 10 years to finish a book. Most of them have finished books, several books in that time, a book a year, a book every 2 years, whatever it is. But it takes 10 years before they write a book that actually resonates with readers and does well. So you need to ask yourself, do you want to write 5 books that are not very well written before you figure out how to write a fantastic book? If you do, then by all means, use that approach. But for me personally, I didn't want to wait. I didn't want to put out books that were not the best they could be. And all of the early stories I had, I thought they were fantastic. I loved them. I felt emotion for them, and I wanted readers to as well. Why put those out in a way that is flat and the reader's not going to enjoy them the same way you do in your own head, right? The second piece of advice that I want you to ignore is the whole just buckle down and force yourself to write every day. Now, don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with writing every day, and if you can do that, more power to you, you are a rock star. It is the buckle down and force part that I have a problem with. And it is because of what I explained before about subconscious creativity. you cannot force creativity. Okay. Every time you do, your brain is going to seize up, it's going to shut down. And so when you're trying to come up with an ending or what happens next and you just can't think of anything, it's because you're trying to force it. Okay. So by all means, write every day. But again, you need to learn how to submit to your subconscious creativity and let the ideas flow rather than forcing them. And really and truly, this is not as complicated as it probably sounds when I'm explaining it. It's really just a tweak in how you think about your writing, and it will make all the difference in the world. Okay. The third piece of advice that I want you to start ignoring is to read. I mean, this is more general, reading all of the craft books, using all of the templates. And for heaven's sake, stay away from free online writing blogs. The problem with these things is that they don't really teach you how to implement and create your own unique story. Craft books, I have read most of them, and they have a lot of value. They tell us a lot about story, about the psychology of story, but they really are just telling us about beats. They're telling us about the skeleton of a story. And again, they don't teach you how to translate that to an actual book that you've written. Okay. Templates are the same way. They're a little bit too logical minded, and you're going to end up with a subpar story if you use only them to write your story. Again, they have their place, especially in terms of checks and balances, but the work to write your story, the creative work, just goes so much deeper than that. And you shouldn't be starting there and thinking that this is the end all be all of how to write your story, right? And then finally, the online writing blogs, they tend to be very surface level advice, like kind of what the craft books say, except slightly more superficial. They tend to regurgitate advice that has been found on other blogs, right? So you just jump from blog to blog to blog and never actually learn how to write your story. At the end of the day, maybe you had a few inspirations, maybe you got a few nuggets that were valuable to you. Great. But have you finished writing your story yet? If no, they're not actually helping you do that. And the final piece of advice I want you to stop listening to is to just start writing, which is kind of synonymous with pantsing or discovery writing. Now, I am not at all throwing shade on pantsing. We all, every single one of us, are a combination of plotting and pantsing. We all do both. But the problem with just pantsing without any kind of plan or idea where we're going is that you tend to meander around. Okay, maybe this could happen, maybe that could happen. I kind of like this, I kind of like that. That does not create a cohesive story. That feels like the story is meandering around. And if it feels that way to your reader, it takes all the emotion out of the story and your reader will be bored. Okay, so it's not that I'm against pantsing. You can actually follow the techniques that I teach and still be a pantser. You just have to do it in a particular way with particular things in mind. Okay, actually, what I teach is sort of like pantsing, but it's sort of like pantsing your outline because there is a lot of creativity in pantsing. And pantsing, when people do that, they actually are surrendering to their subconscious creativity. So that much of it they're doing correctly. Okay, but you have to have a plan. You have to have at least something that you're aiming for so that there's cohesion in aiming for that thing. Otherwise, you just have a story that goes all over the place. Okay, so just to say, oh, just start writing and you'll get there. No, that's never going to be helpful because even if you get there eventually, it's not going to be a story that hooks readers. Okay, it's going to be an all over the place story that feels like it has no direction because when you were writing it, it didn't. Now, I want you to know that all of this advice I'm telling you to ignore, I have done it too. Most writers have. I mean, it's just the natural way that we start to write our fiction when we decide that this is something we want to do, right? But you have to understand that these are the amateur approaches to fiction writing. So they'll get you started, but they're never going to be able to help you finish, and they're never going to get you to where you want to be. They certainly are not going to turn you into a master storyteller who can turn any premise she comes up with into an unputdownable novel that readers can't get enough of. So here's what you should be doing instead. Remember, it's not about plot twists, it's not about sex, it's not about shock value. It's about giving the reader a truly emotional and cathartic experience that changes them. So you need to start focusing on the emotion of your story. Write from the emotion first and the plot second. You need to have so much clarity, so much psychological and emotional clarity on your story, which then actually is what drives the plot events, that you can discuss any part of your story at the drop of a hat. Once again, this is the problem with pantsing, is that your story meanders and someone says, well, what does your character feel here? Or why did they decide to do this? And it makes sense to you in your head, but you can't really explain it, okay? And that is no way to write a story. I want you to think for a minute about baking. Let's say that you want to bake a cake. We'll call it a yellow American style cake with buttercream frosting, okay? Fantastic. Sounds good. And you want to make that cake. When you go into the kitchen to start preparing the batter, do you just start throwing random ingredients in? Little of this, little of that. Let's see what's in the fridge. We'll throw some ketchup in there. We'll throw some pickle relish in there. Oh, that doesn't taste very good. That doesn't taste like a cake. Okay, we're going to throw this out. We're going to start again. I mean, you could do it that way, and hopefully, eventually, after many, many, many ingredients and tries and many, many things going into the garbage can, maybe you'll get some semblance of a cake. But you can't say for sure that you'll get there if you have no idea what ingredients go in. It's always going to be a little bit off, right? Or it's revolutionary, but you could actually have a plan. Like you could know what the final product is you're going for and pick up a recipe that tells you exactly what ingredients go in and in what order and how to put them together and how to prepare them. You guys, it's the same thing when you're pantsing, okay? If you have no idea where you're going and you don't know what ingredients need to go in and you don't know what's going to hook a reader, really truly hook the reader. And again, keep in mind, I'm not talking about plot events. I'm not telling you what to write in your story, but just how to write it so that what you already have planned hooks the reader, okay? If you don't know how to do that, and certainly if you don't know what the plot events are going to be, then you're just throwing things into the bowl and hoping you get somewhere eventually. And don't get me wrong, you can do that. It's not like no one's ever done that before, but it's going to take a long time and a lot of heartache and a lot of banging your head against the desk because you can't figure out where to go next. And a lot of writing and rewriting because it doesn't feel right and it doesn't feel very aligned with your story and you're just not feeling the emotion of it, and on and on and on. Okay? You need to gain clarity on your story, meaning the plot, the inner arc, and the emotion before you start writing. And if you do that, writing becomes shockingly easy. Okay? Most importantly, you need to start letting your ideas flow from the subconscious creativity rather than the conscious mind, as we've discussed. Using techniques outside of yourself, like craft books and templates and other people's stories, or just trying to force your story out when it doesn't want to come, is using your conscious mind to create the story. And as I said, your creativity, your imagination, your emotions, everything that are really important in creating fiction, they all live in the subconscious mind. Look, because we have so many distractions in our world, because of AI, and because we as a society are becoming so disconnected in many ways, if you just throw words and fun plot events onto the page, it's not going to land with your reader. It never is. I remember always feeling like my writing was flat and boring and inadequate. I doubted very much whether readers were actually going to like this story. And when I read it back to myself, it sounded trite and amateurish. It didn't sound professional like the authors that I loved to read. And all of that sort of thing leads to imposter syndrome and burnout for writers. I don't want that for you. I mean, who wants to rack their brain, do all of this draining creative work? And make no mistake, creative work does burn calories and make you tired, and have nothing to show for it. This is how I used to approach writing my stories, and it was grueling. But when I learned to use my subconscious creativity to write my stories, to tell the stories that I wanted to tell, but in a way that served the reader by giving them a highly emotional experience, it changed everything. Everything I write now is done with relaxed creativity and empowerment. It's work I cannot wait to get back to the point where right now I'm writing a dragon fantasy doorstopper series, kind of like Game of Thrones, only tamer. And I have six point of view characters that all have to have their own transformational arcs. I have tons of details to keep track of for character, for plot, for world building, for theme, you name it. But I've never had an easier time figuring out the story and the arcs and what it's going to look like. And I've never had readers resonate more with the story than they are resonating with this series. I've never gotten reviews that gush quite as hard as they are for this particular series. Okay, so here's where it's all going to come together. What do you need to do this year to become a successful fiction author? Because no one in our industry is talking about this, and you need to understand this. Writing is not about crazy plot events. It's not about super cool worlds that are different than ours. And while we all know that sex sells, and sex and romance definitely have their place when used correctly in a story, if you're just throwing it into your story as a way to hook the reader, it's never going to work for you. Those kinds of tactics are never going to bring you the fiction success that you crave, because they are putting band-aids on problems rather than understanding the deep foundational way in which to fix them. Fiction writing is about creating emotion for your reader by showing them the transformational journey of a character. The only way to truly hook a reader and keep them turning pages is by giving them an emotional experience. And the best way to do that is through writing transformational stories. By understanding the psychology of humans, of readers, and of fiction in general and how they all intersect. It may sound complicated, but I promise you it's really not. Most of it is very common sense. You've just never been taught this before or shown the step-by-step process for how to do it to write fiction. The myth you need to understand going into 2026 so that you can finally finish your manuscript, so that you can wow readers and build a loyal readership, so that you can finally take steps toward making money off your royalties, is that more plot twists do not equal better fiction. In fact, the opposite is true. Plot twists are fantastic when they're done well and when they're used appropriately. But when you learn to make every single scene in your book evoke emotion, you won't need to rely on plot twists to keep your reader reading. You'll be able to turn every story you come up with into something that readers cannot get enough of, no matter what the plot is, no matter what the genre, no matter what the tropes. When you have a structure that readers subconsciously understand and connect with, characters that feel achingly real, and an emotional story that leads to transformation and powerful catharsis, you won't be able to stop that book from selling. Our readers are sick of generic, flat, and AI-driven stories. Give them something that punches them right in the feels and knocks them on their butts emotionally. That is what they want. And my Emotional Storytellers Intensive can teach you how to do that with the unique story or premise that you've already conceived of. If you want to succeed at fiction writing in 2026, save yourself a ton of time and brain cramp and frustration, you've got to stop writing your stories from plot-based templates and start writing them from a place of emotion instead. There is nothing wrong with you. It's not that you aren't creative enough or smart enough or disciplined enough. Stop thinking that right now because it's incorrect. You don't need more craft books. You don't need a better plot. And you don't need more surface level writing advice. You need the system that will actually work to create a story readers want, and that is actually working right now for those of us who know how to use it. We need to stop doing what the industry has been telling us to do for the last 50 years. We understand so much more now about neuroscience and the subconscious mind, but for some reason, the fiction writing industry just hasn't caught up. And those methods, while they may work eventually, usually take about 10 years to help you master your craft. But guess what? Here's the good news. It is very possible to revolutionize your writing process and go from struggling writer to successful author in less than 6 months. You can and should do that because now in 2026, between algorithms and AI and competition and everything else, the game has changed. Okay, so if this is something that you are interested in learning and you know you want this, and you are curious as to how this new writing process should look, I'm going to go ahead and break down that process in this video right here. So go ahead and click on that to watch that, and I will see you there.